All right, so we're back and ready to jump back into Decoded influence.
Still diving deep into Rocky and Creed.
Yeah. Picking up where we left off last time, you know how we were talking about how these films go way beyond just being about boxing?
Hmm.
They really give us this, like, incredible lens to look at how ideas about race and mentorship, even the American dream itself, have shifted over time.
Exactly. They're like a reflection of these complex changes happening in society.
And get this, we're going to explore how even that boxing ring, like, becomes this space to look at things like gentrification and the impact of the prison system.
And even how black masculinity is portrayed in different ways.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
It's interesting, right? Like the Rocky series, even though it's groundbreaking, sometimes relied on those like storytelling shortcuts, I guess you could call them tropes, that reinforced certain ideas about race.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. Like the idea of a black character having to sacrifice himself so that the white character can achieve victory.
You're talking about Apollo's death in Rocky IV.
Exactly.
It's like his death becomes this, like, fuel for Rocky to defeat Drago.
Yeah, like Apollo's sacrifice is what allows Rocky to win one for America.
Wow. Yeah, I see what you mean.
And it's a familiar story, not just in movies, but even in how we often talk about American history, right?
Sure.
And it's something that the Creed films really start to challenge head on.
Yeah, so then when Rocky becomes Adonis's mentor, it seems like we're kind of flipping that script, you know?
Right.
But there's still that underlying tension, right?
Absolutely.
Because even though Rocky's presented as this underdog, he comes from a completely different world than Adonis.
One of the articles we read pointed out this inherent conflict,
Okay.
that no matter how tough Rocky's life was, his experiences are still shaped by being a white man in America. And while the movies kind of try to acknowledge that, sometimes they also like gloss over it a bit.
You know, that reminds me of that scene where Rocky tells Adonis, I had to prove I wasn't a joke, same as you.
Exactly.
It's like, on one hand, they're trying to find that shared struggle, but on the other hand, it kind of avoids this huge part of what makes their journey so different.
Right. They have that common ground, but kind of avoid the big differences too.
Yeah, and then Creed III does something really interesting.
What's that?
It takes Rocky completely out of the picture.
Yeah, that was a bold move.
Such a big shift for
Yeah.
the series. And I think it opened up this whole new space for the film, you know,
How so?
to explore conflicts and mentorship within the Black community
Yeah.
without that white perspective always being there.
It's a crucial shift. And the relationship between Adonis and Dame, his childhood friend who becomes his rival, really becomes the heart of that exploration.
Dame, yeah, he's such a complex character. Like, so much anger there, but you can tell he represents something way bigger than just a personal grudge against Adonis. You can just feel the weight of other people's experiences on him.
Exactly. We find out Dame spent 18 years in prison, while Adonis was out there achieving all his dreams. That contrast alone, it's like a harsh spotlight on the American prison system and how it disproportionately impacts Black communities.
It's almost like the system itself is setting these two Black men from similar backgrounds on totally different paths. I mean, how can someone like Dane not be angry?
Right. One article argues that Dame's rage isn't even really just directed at Adonis. It's directed at this whole system that allowed Adonis to succeed while he was locked away.
He becomes this, like, symbol
Yeah.
of all the people who get left behind and forgotten by a society that only celebrates those few winners.
Absolutely.
And it's this weight that Adonis carries too, right? You can see this guilt in him knowing his success came at a cost that someone like Dame had to pay.
It's a really powerful dynamic. It shows
Yeah.
that even within the Black community, these deep divisions exist, created by systemic inequality. And it's like, for someone like Adonis, individual success can be all tangled up with feelings of guilt and the struggle to reconcile with the reality of others who weren't as lucky.
There's this interesting visual element too that keeps popping up. Doors.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with Dame literally breaking into Adonis's mansion. It's almost like those physical barriers represent those invisible barriers of privilege and success. You know what I mean?
Right, right. Adonis has this outward image of success, the mansion, wealth, family. But Dame breaking in, it shatters that perfect picture.
Yeah.
It forces Adonis to confront the fact that he can't just shut out the past or ignore the forces that shaped both their lives.
And then that leads to one of the most visually striking scenes in the film, I think.
Yeah.
That silent fight scene.
Oh, in the arena.
Yeah. It was so different from anything in the Rocky movies, but it was just so captivating.
It was powerful, right? One of the sources we looked at interpreted that scene as a way to visualize the trauma of systemic racism.
Mm.
It's like the silence itself speaks volumes about the pain and the struggle that often get hidden beneath the surface.
It's so much more than a boxing match at that point.
Hmm.
They're battling these unseen forces that have been impacting their lives since they were kids.
Mm.
It's like their personal fight becomes this larger fight against a system that's almost designed to keep them apart.
And it makes you think, right? It shows how these films have moved beyond just simple stories of reconciliation. The question they're asking now is, can individual success, like what Adonis has achieved, truly exist without acknowledging and addressing the systems that create such inequality?
That is such a powerful question to think about.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something that'll stay with me.
Well,
But before we get too deep into that, we have to talk about how these films use visual storytelling and the music, those soundtracks, to explore all these themes in even deeper ways.
yeah, we should definitely get into that.
It's wild how these movies use like the visuals, the way scenes are shot, even the sets, to really like hammer home these complicated themes, you know?
It's true, the visual language of film, it can be so powerful.
Totally.
It goes way beyond just what the characters are saying. It's about the whole look and feel of the movie and how those things work together to create meaning.
It's like a whole other level of storytelling.
yeah.
And in the Rocky and Creed movies, you see how those visual choices, they kind of evolve as the franchise tackles these more complex issues.
Right.
Like take the training montages.
Oh,
They're
yeah,
such a classic part of these films,
for sure.
but they're doing so much more than just showing us guys working out, you know?
Absolutely. They often reveal something deeper about the characters and the challenges they face.
Like what?
Well, for example, think about Rocky III. You have those contrasting montages of Apollo training Rocky on a beautiful sunny California beach,
Oh, yeah.
and then you cut to Clubber Lang training in this dark, isolated gym.
Oh, yeah. That's such a stark contrast visually.
It is, right?
It's like those two settings are representing totally different worlds,
Exactly.
two completely different experiences of what it means to be a black man in America.
You got it. Apollo, with his success and his flamboyant style, he's training in this open communal space, while Clubber, fueled by his rage and resentment, is all alone in this gritty, almost claustrophobic environment. It's a really powerful way to visually represent these different expressions of Black masculinity.
It is. It's subtle, but it
Yeah.
really shapes how you see each character's journey.
Right.
Like, you see Apollo's path as being more integrated into mainstream society, while Clubber feels like he's constantly battling against the margins.
Yeah, that's a great observation.
And then you have the visual contrasts in Rocky the Thief, which are even more in your face.
How so?
The stark difference between Ivan Drago's, like, sterile, high-tech training facility and Rocky's rustic, almost primal training in the snowy Siberian wilderness.
Yeah,
It's like straight-out Cold War propaganda, you know?
right.
Drago represents the cold, soulless machine of the Soviet Union, while Rocky embodies that rugged, individualistic American spirit.
It plays right into all those anxieties people had back then about the clash between these two superpowers.
Totally.
It taps into those deep-seated cultural anxieties of that era.
And then you have Creed and the way Adonis runs through Philadelphia.
Yeah.
You might think, oh, it's just like Rocky's iconic run, but it's
Oh,
not,
yeah.
is it?
You're right. It's different, and that difference tells us something really important.
What's that?
Adonis is running through a Philadelphia that's been transformed by gentrification.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, gentrification is when wealthier people move into a neighborhood, and that often drives up costs and pushes out the people who were living there before.
Right.
So Adonis is navigating a city where longtime residents, often Black families, are being displaced and are having to grapple with a changing landscape.
It's like a totally different image than Rocky running through the city all those years ago.
Right.
It's not just about one man's personal journey anymore.
Exactly.
It's about how that journey is happening against this backdrop of these larger forces of change and inequality.
And that evolution continues in Creed III.
Oh, yeah.
Remember those fight scenes?
Oh, yeah.
They're such a departure from the classic Rocky style.
Those abstract, almost anime-inspired fight sequences were insane. They were visually stunning, but they also felt so raw and emotionally charged.
You're right.
It felt like we were seeing something totally new in these films.
They were a bold choice, for sure.
Or so.
One of the sources we read suggested that those sequences could be a way to visualize the trauma that stems from experiencing systemic racism.
Mm.
They're not just physical fights, They're representations of these internal struggles
Right.
and the psychological weight of oppression.
It's like those abstract visuals are giving a form to those unseen forces, you know, the
Exactly.
ones that are shaping the characters' lives, the ones that are hard to even put into words but have such a real impact.
And it was a choice made by Michael B. Jordan, who directed and starred in Creed 3.
Right.
He was really pushing the boundaries of the franchise,
Totally.
of finding new and innovative ways to tell these stories and to visually represent those deep, unspoken experiences.
So we've talked about the visuals, but we can't forget about the music.
The
The
soundtracks.
soundtracks in these films are iconic.
They are.
And just like the visual storytelling, the music choices evolve too to reflect those changing themes.
Absolutely. It's not just about those classic fist-pumping anthems anymore.
Yeah.
The music takes on these whole new layers of meaning.
Give me an example.
Okay, think about how they use James Brown's Living in America in Rocky 3.
Okay.
It's playing during Apollo's death scene.
It's so ironic, right? You have
Yeah.
this upbeat, patriotic song about the American dream, but this incredibly tragic event is unfolding at the same time.
It's almost like a commentary on how Black talent and contributions to American culture are often celebrated, while the very real struggles and injustices faced by Black Americans are ignored.
Wow, yeah.
It's a powerful juxtaposition.
Definitely.
And then you have the Creed films, which bring in a whole new soundscape.
Like what?
Well, they use a lot of hip-hop,
Okay.
especially artists like Meek Mill who are rooted in Philadelphia.
Right.
And that feels so much more grounded in the contemporary Black experience.
Makes sense.
It's not just about incorporating a popular genre. It's
Like it's giving a voice to a perspective that wasn't really there in the earlier films.
exactly, it's about centering those voices and perspectives of Black artists and communities.
I like that.
And it's not just the genre that changes, the overall tone of the music evolves too.
How so?
Think about Creed 2. It doesn't rely on those big, triumphant 80s rock anthems that were so central to the Rocky films.
Right.
Instead, it uses a score that's much more somber and introspective.
Oh, I see what you mean.
That shift in tone really highlights the weight of history and the emotional toll that these generational conflicts have taken on Adonis and Victor Drago.
They're both carrying the burdens of their father's legacies.
Exactly.
And the music reflects that complexity.
It does.
So basically, you've got these incredible visual metaphors, this evolving soundtrack, and they're all working together to create this much richer, more nuanced story that we saw in the original Rocky films.
Yes.
It's like the filmmakers are using every tool they have to really dig deep into these issues.
It's remarkable how these films, which started as pretty straightforward boxing dramas, have evolved into something so much more profound.
Yeah.
They're giving us a lens to examine these complicated societal issues.
And as we go deeper into the Creed films, those questions become even more important to the story.
Absolutely.
And that's what we'll be getting into as we continue our deep dive.
Sounds good.
We'll unpack how the idea of mentorship itself changes, not just as a relationship between two people, but as a way to address the systemic inequalities that shape the characters' lives.
Okay, so we've talked about how the visuals and the music add these layers of meaning to the Rocky and Creed films. But I'm really fascinated by how the whole idea of mentorship changes throughout these movies. Like, it's not just about one guy teaching another anymore, is it? It becomes about whether mentorship can actually address those systemic inequalities, those bigger issues we've been unpacking.
Exactly. The films start to question if just having a mentor is enough to overcome the forces that are shaping these characters' lives, you know?
Right. It's not just about individual growth. It's about how their journeys connect to these bigger questions about race and class and opportunity. Yeah. And to see how that shift happens, we have to go back to Apollo and Rocky. Like, at first they're rivals, then friends. And then Apollo trains Rocky to fight Clubber Lang. Seems like that classic mentor-student thing.
But looking back on it now, with all these layers of race and social context, it's not that simple.
You got it.
Yeah.
Up on the surface level, it looks like friendship, respect, all that. But there's more there. You've got Apollo, this super talented Black champion, helping Rocky, the white underdog, to become even more successful. And then you have Apollo's tragic death in Rocky the Fourth, and Rocky taking on this burden of carrying his legacy, like avenging him.
It plays into that trope we were talking about earlier, the idea that Black sacrifice is needed for the white guy to win, to be the hero.
It's a pattern you see a lot in movies and in how we talk about history, and it's what the Creed movies are trying to turn on its head.
Okay, so then we get to the Creed films, and we have Rocky mentoring Adonis. It seems like we flipped the script now, right?
Right.
You've got this older white mentor guiding this young black man who's trying to make his own mark.
It is a flip, and it's interesting for sure. But it makes you wonder about the power dynamic, right? Can Rocky, with his background and all the privilege he's had, really understand what Adonis is going through?
Exactly. Like that scene where Rocky says, I had to prove I wasn't a joke, same as you. It feels like he's trying to connect with Adonis, but it kind of ignores how different their experiences are.
Exactly. Rocky's privilege, even as an underdog, is something the film sometimes brushes aside.
Then comes Creed the Third,
Right.
and it just takes Rocky out of the picture completely. No mentor, no safety net. Adonis has to deal with everything on his own.
It's a huge change, and it changes the whole conversation about mentorship in these movies. And that's where Dame comes in. He's this figure from Adonis's past who represents all the people who didn't have those opportunities, who didn't have a Rocky in their corner.
He's like a shadow, a reminder of what can happen when the system fails you.
And Adonis, with his success and his guilt, he feels this pull to try to help Dame, almost like he's trying to make things right for the luck he's had.
But Dame's situation is way more complex than that, right? It's not just about having a mentor, it's about needing the whole system to change.
Absolutely. And that's where the idea of individual mentorship breaks down. The film is saying that being nice, trying to help one person, it's not enough to fix these huge systemic problems.
So it becomes less about fixing one relationship and more about understanding how we're all responsible. It's not enough for Adonis to say sorry or give Dame a hand up. He has to see that he's part of the system that created these inequalities to begin with.
Right. It's about using your position, your influence, to push for real change in how things work.
And the film doesn't give easy answers, does it? Adonis wins the fight against Dame, but you get this feeling that the struggle isn't over. Not even close.
Yeah. It's like the film is pushing us to think bigger, beyond those feel-good stories, to realize that being a true ally means more than just individual acts of kindness. It means working to dismantle the structures that cause injustice in the first place.
So these movies, they've gone from those simple underdog stories to something much deeper. They're making us think about mentorship, about how inequality affects everyone, about what it really means to fight for justice, and not just in the boxing ring.
And that's what's so fascinating about this whole franchise. It started as these boxing dramas, but they've become something so much more meaningful. They give us a way to look at the world, at our own struggles, and how we can create change.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. And for all you deep divers out there, keep those conversations going. What other movies or shows or pop culture things do you want us to decode? Let us know in the comments, like and share this episode, and follow us for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world.
Until next time.